on this note, we'll go to Imam Zaid Shakir. He's a very well-known scholar of Islam, and we'll try to understand what his concept is of political Islam and what Islam says about democracy and what kind of state Islam posits.
Right.
So let's talk to Imam Zaid Shakir and learn more from him. Assalamu alaikum, Prophet Imam Zaid. Let's get down to the questions. What I would like to ask you is, what is the concept of democracy in Islam, in your opinion?
Well, I think the question isn't so much what is the concept of democracy in Islam, because democracy is a very general term, and there's no equivalent Islamic term per se. I think the question should be, are there forms of democracy that are compatible with Islam? And if we frame the question that way, I think we can definitely say there are forms of democracy that are compatible with Islam. But in looking at the details of that, there's a lot of clarification and a lot of nuances that we have to consider.
But has democracy been successful in any Muslim country in the world today?
Well, I think if you consider aspects of democracy such as popular rule, popular elections, then definitely there are Muslim countries that have had those aspects of democracy. You have a long history of popular elections in Turkey that have been occasionally interrupted by periods of military intervention in the political system, but overall there's been a long history of successful electoral politics in Turkey. You have the experiment in Iran, which, even though the candidate selection process could be questioned in terms of every candidate being approved by the supreme authority or the Majlis of experts, the Majlis al-Kubrahan, despite that, they've had a very successful system of electoral politics where you've had hardliners, so-called, elected. You've had moderates, so-called moderates, such as Rafsanjani or Khatimi, elected. You've had successful turning over of power. You've had smooth transition of power. So although you can challenge or question the candidate selection process, you could challenge the candidate selection process in the United States.
A lot of sheikhs say that we should get the Khilafat form back, but should we do ijtihad and look for manners and form that bring democracy back within the Khilafat?
Well, again, those two forms of conceptions of government aren't necessarily contradictory. If you had a Khilafah who was the supreme leader of the Muslim community, and the spiritual leader, such as, say, the Pope of Rome, where you had a central figure that provided leadership at a spiritual level and that was an ultimate authority to resolve certain conflicts, that doesn't negate the existence of a popularly elective legislative body to represent the interest of the people, because the Khilafah system is predicated on the existence of what we call Ahlul Hal wal Aqd.
Indeed.
So the people that loose and bind, and those people are those who are recognized in the society for their eminence. And if those people were selected, for example, by popular vote, that would not contradict the idea of Ahlul Hal wal Aqd.
So in the Islamic system, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'd like to know, lastly, in an Islamic system, does the state and the clergy, is there a divide, or there shouldn't be a divide at all?
Well, I think it's very important to define the role of the state vis-a-vis the religious authorities. If the job of the state is to ensure the smooth executive function of the state, to make sure that the sewage is treated, make sure that to make sure that business and commerce takes place according to Islamic rules, then there's ample for an elected or representative body to undertake those executive functions. And the role of the clergy in such a system traditionally has been as acting as a moral voice and as a source of moral consciousness to ensure that the overall nature of the society stays within conformity to Islamic rules. So it doesn't mean that the clergy necessarily have to rule, but that the clergy are a viable moral authority to ensure that those who are ruling are doing so in accordance with sound Islamic principles.
Well, Imam Zaid, this is what we have time for. Shukran lakum.
طيب. السلام عليكم.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.